Good afternoon. This is the Show, the host of the Awareness Show, Michelle Padilla, and I have the legendary Dean Butler on the show today. We had the little technical difficulties. It's been too hot in Northern California. Right now, we are at 105 degrees here in Sacramento, and I was just talking to Dean. He said it's hot as well in San Fernando Valley. So, Dean, how are you today?
Well, not as hot as you are. I have air conditioning pouring down on me in my office, so I actually have a sweater on in my office because it's like a meat. It's really like a meat locker in here.
It is.
So, and it sounds like it too. I realize have a little bit of air around me with this, but we'll do the best we can, Michelle.
Yes, we will. So how was first? How was your 4th of July? Was it fun? Did you do anything fun?
We had a very quiet day at home yesterday, which was great because it's been a very busy time with the launching of my book, and I've been out and about constantly. So being at home yesterday was a great relief. It got very loud in West Los Angeles last night with all the fireworks, which seemed to be starting around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which I can't quite figure out because you couldn't really see them at 3 o'clock. But the boom, boom, boom started, and then there was a lot of a lot of noise in the air, well past midnight
Oh
last
yeah.
night. So yeah, so there was a lot going on.
I see. I'm originally from LA, so yeah, they would keep me up 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then we have two dogs, and they were very anxious yesterday, and they started around about 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, illegal fireworks when they were coming up by our house. So we did not appreciate that at all. So they were in my room last night, and so it was like you said, I don't like the 4th of July that much. Not my favorite holiday. So 50 years, a
We
little
gave our
house.
dog okay.
Oops,
Sorry,
no
Michelle,
worries.
you were saying?
50 years, a little house on the prairie. I can't believe that. I'm 48 years old. That's how long I've been watching Little House on the Prairie. So it's very interesting. And I've seen, all the shows. I start rewatching them again after I talk to you. And then now all of a sudden on my YouTube channel, little clips of Little House on the Prairie pops up. So as a kid, I was
Yeah.
in and out of the hospital because I have a condition called 22q11, and I couldn't really go outside that much. So my TV shows were Little House on the Prairie, Gidget, Old Gidget, New Gidget. What else? We had a whole bunch of shows back then. Gilligan's Island. So it was
You probably watched the Waltons a little bit. I'm sure you watched the Waltons on
yes,
CBS. That would have been a big one for you.
yep.
Yeah.
I am going
So yeah, there
Alice.
was a
Do you remember Alice?
yes, of course. I do remember Alice. It was never a show that I watched a lot, but it was very successful. No
Yes.
question about that. Yeah.
And you were saying before I interrupted. Sorry about that.
No, just saying that 70s 80s era was really the end of a traditional era of family programming that has given way to a very different look at family television in the world today. um, and of course the networks are seem to be dominated more by game shows, and which is just sort of astonishing in prime time to be dealing with contest shows and reality shows and all of that. And now you really watch the most interesting programming um, on cable and in as part of the streaming universe,
Yep.
and shows are targeted to
Yes. Yes.
very specific, specialized audiences, as opposed to the networks, which were in our era which were looking for the largest, broadest based audience they could identify. So it's a very different emphasis on television today.
Yeah, like you were saying, the shows that we saw back in the 70s and 80s, I don't think it would be very appropriate for today because a lot of people do not like it. They don't, they will probably say some mean stuff about Little House on the Prairie, Waltons, because that's how it is today. Diff- back then we didn't have a say in it. We had totally free era of what to do. So now it's like, okay, yeah, so it's interesting, like you're saying. It's not really that much. You got talk shows, you don't see a lot of daytime soap operas anymore. Um, you still see The Price is Right. You don't even see
Mm.
Oprah anymore. So it varies, so
Well, there are obviously a lot of different talk shows that are on in the afternoon. But television is really dominated by talking heads now, whether it be talk shows, news programming, opinion shows, because those are the least expensive shows to make.
yep.
In a studio, and of course, you add a studio audience to it, that adds a component to
See,
a
that's
production that's it. But talk shows are a very big dominant part of goes on television today.
Yeah, that I believe so. And like I said, I had my Saturday morning cartoons, and then I think at the time there was a Little House on the Prairie cartoon. I don't know if I'm right, but I thought there was a Little House on the Prairie cartoon.
Hmm. I think there was a cartoon that was a short, yeah. So, what were your
What was
favorite
that?
cartoons, Michelle?
Oh man, I had like to watch Smurfs. I'm very fond of Smurfs. I liked Little My Little Pony, Strawberry Shortcake, Gilligan's Island, even the wrestlers. I was a big fan of WWE. What else? Gem and the Holograms. Uh, let's see. There was one down in Fraggle Rock. That was my favorite. I could go on and on. Super Friends, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Care Bears. That was my childhood. What about yours?
Yeah. So, I think my favorite cartoons were a half hour cartoon that was done like a drama called Johnny Quest.
Mm,
That was when we were kids. That was a really popular, and it was like an adventure show. It wasn't a cartoon in the sense that we think of cartoons today. It was one continuous story that went for half an hour as opposed to a 4 to 5 minute cartoon. And then the other things that were I loved were my brother and I, every Saturday morning loved watching the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner
yep,
Hour.
yep.
And our favorite character was Yosemite Sam, and his because of his short temper, and of course we loved the Roadrunner and the Coyote and all that. So yeah, cartoons have changed a lot. My grandchildren now watch things like Paw Patrol when they were a little younger, and now it's all the Ninjago Lego based cartoons, and a lot of Japanese anime now is that's what he's watching at coming almost 13 years old. That's what he's most interested in. I can't get him to watch Little House. It's too slow for him. Little House was shot on film. It was not highly aggressive cutting. It wasn't aggressive cutting at all. It was by today's standards, a very slow paced traditional cinema approach, and it's hard to get kids
Watch it.
to watch that today because it just doesn't move fast enough for
I have
them.
I
I,
agree with you. My cousin is 16. I tried to get her to watch I Love Lucy, and her response
hmm,
is it's not bright enough for me. It's too old school, too retro. I'm saying, okay, fine.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the great comedies of all time, and it stands up. You can watch it today. It works as well today, I think, as it worked then. But then that's easy for me to say because I grew up on
Yeah.
it. It's just
Now,
it's brilliant situation comedy is what it is, and I just think it's an extraordinary show, and it is one of the most successful programs in the history of television. And because it continues to be loved and appreciated, just as Little House does, actually, as much as it's not for everybody. But here with Little House celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, Little House has really stood a test of time to be appreciated for a long, long time.
when did Little House first premiere?
So Little House premiered initially, or in the very beginning. Well, there was a pilot in March of 1974 that aired, and that pilot got a wonderful response, and NBC bought a full season of the show a week after that pilot aired in March of 1974. The series premiered on September 11th, 1974, and Little House has never been off of television since that initial airing that it had, whether domestically, internationally. I mean, the program still airs in 140 countries around the world every day in over 40 languages. So it continues to be an enormously successful program,
Yes.
and it's been an amazing thing for all of us to be a part of it.
Now, since it since it aired 1974, what television series did you have to next to it? Like, what were your like? I would say,
Well, I never really watched Little House until I became a part of it, and I was by the time I was aware of Little House, which was a little later, it had moved to Monday nights.
okay,
And on Monday nights, so by the when I was a so it premiered in September of 1974. Actually, I was just going off to college at that point. In September of 1974, I was starting my freshman year in college and was not at home on a Wednesday night watching television. I mean, I wasn't in front of a television at all during those years.
right.
And then later, when it moved to Monday night, I was watching Monday Night Football on ABC, and living on the West Coast. Those games began at 6 p.m. And so I wasn't going to be changing the channel to NBC at 8 o'clock
Yeah,
and in the middle of a good game. I wasn't going to change the channel. Little House was not really aimed at me as a male in my late teens, early 20s. I was not the demographic that Little House was pointing towards. I think there were probably plenty of young men who were watching it, but at that point in time, I was not watching it. I did not start watching it regularly until I was hired
yeah,
to be on the program, and then I got very interested in what it was, because I was moved by it immediately, by how beautifully produced it was, and how warm and sweet the acting was, and good storytelling, beautiful music, beautiful scenery. I mean, all of it, everything about it worked.
right. Yeah.
But it was not something I was watching until I was a part of it.
I think I started watching it later when I was getting a little bit older, maybe like five, six, seven, maybe I don't know, because I was born in 1976. So yeah, I did
Mhm.
not know anything about that.
Yeah, so you probably weren't consciously watching it until early in the 80s. So maybe just before it ended, you might have started watching it. And then, of course, you could have watched it extensively in reruns, first in early afternoon, or an early prime, or early fringe is what the time period was called, afternoon television to early fringe.
Yes.
And then, of course, for years, it has been on cable, on channels like Cozy and Hallmark and Me and all these channels that they run it now, and they run it extensive numbers of hours a day. So people, and then of course, if you're a streamer, you can watch it on iTunes, kind of on Roku 24 hours a day. You can watch it
Good.
on
Yep.
Peacock 24 hours a
Peacock,
day.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think
and
all of that.
iTunes. Yeah, it's very it's there are a lot of ways to watch the program, and that's been one of the wonderful things about the way television has evolved is we all are the programmers now.
Yeah,
You know that we have broken free of the control of a network telling us when we're going to watch something. Now we watch it when we want to watch it, and we can watch something anytime and all day long if we choose to. So it's a different time.
it is. And it's so fascinating because, now we could tell our kids or our cousins, hey, this is what we got to watch when we were sick. We watched The Little House on the Prairie, we watched The Price is Right, and whatever soap operas there were back in the 1980s. So I would always watch when I was sick with my grandma. It would be Days of Our Lives. And I think it was Guiding Light or One Life to Live, one of those shows. So like I
Mhm.
said, I was always watching TV because I was in the house, mostly couldn't do that much activity. Um, and again, I'm glad I had the television. So I'm the only child. And so, you know, so that's my experience. And then we were talking about how I got the syndrome. So I'm going to bring that up, how I started the awareness show. So I it's gonna be about almost 15 years I got diagnosed with 22q11, otherwise known D George. And this is why I'm wearing my logo. It's an X chromosome, so
Mm,
it's a tiny piece of a chromosome that has over 200 symptoms. You got heart problems, ear problems, sinus problems, mouth problems, feeding problems, and it
mm,
goes on and on and on. I got diagnosed at the age of 32 because at the time SSI said there was I could work. There's nothing wrong with you. They did not see the whole picture. So basically, they didn't see the
mm,
whole picture, and so I had to take a genetic testing called FISH, and after I found out, that's what got the ball rolling, and I had a grandma seizure at the age of either 17, 18. I was in a coma for about a week, so I suffered brain damage, and later on, I got diagnosed intellectual disability. So all this stuff was happening. I did not know about 22q11. So I almost
mm,
died. Well, they told me my life expectancy time was 21. So now I am 38 years old. Not 38, I'm sorry, 48 years old. And so my dad at the time said, go out to events, get the name out there and try to do something. And then once I started going to Cal State Dominguez, I saw that they had a radio station, and I'm like, maybe I should do the radio station. Let me talk to my dad and see what he says. He says, go for it. In the beginning, we were in the dungeon.
mm,
That's what we call it, because we had no internet connection. My dad would be texting me, say something, say something. I didn't know what to say. So as time got older, I talked about 22q11, and we are going on 13 years of the awareness show as of next month, August. So we're looking forward to that. So our name got grew, and a lot of people are now understanding what 22q11 is. So that's great, but we
mm.
need to do a little bit more advanced on it. So um, it's been interesting. As I get older, there's going to be stuff going wrong with me. So hopefully not as bad as some of the other kids have. So, which is a good thing. I got a good job. I work at Department of
Yeah.
Conservation, and I actually got the resources up here because back in LA, I could not get the services at all whatsoever. So, yeah, and it's been interesting. Uh-oh. So, I moved up to Oxnard, started getting the services that I
No,
needed.
there you're still there. Mm,
I got the services that I needed, and then when I got up here, I found out that I could get a job through Department Rehab, and I was able to land a wonderful job, Department Conservation. so I could do more advocacy work and I could do all the stuff that I need to do. And I'm doing a lot more up here than I would do in LA. So go figure that. It took me to move out of LA, out of LA to be up here. Go figure that. So that's my story. You still there, Dean?
Well, good for you, Michelle. And you're, I am. Do you, so I am here, and good for you that you are doing everything you're doing to raise awareness of. Well, how many? I'm curious if you know how many people are nationally or in the state or regionally are affected who live with what you live with every day.
Well, they said 1 out of 1,000 have this rare condition. Yes. Yes.
1 out of 1,000? That's a huge number of people.
Yes. Yes.
That's a remarkable, if wow, that's a huge number of people.
Well, I don't know if you heard of Camp Lejeune, what's going on with that. So back in the 50s, my grandpa was stationed in Camp Lejeune and they drank the water, which had some type
Yes.
of
No, I
chemistry.
am familiar with that. Yeah.
They had some type of chemistry. So my mom was thinking maybe that might cause me to have 22q because we don't know who has it in my family. Because it,
Hmm.
was not aware, it was unknown back in 70s or 80s, it wasn't that big of a deal. So
Yeah.
it grew.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I don't know the details of the Camp Lejeune uh, issue in terms of, I know it's water, and I know that, as we all do, we've come to know that this thousands and thousands and thousands of people were affected by this if they were stationed. That's a huge Marine Corps base. It's certainly the largest Marine Corps base in the eastern United States.
yep,
And you have thousands of people going through there every 10 weeks or every 6 weeks or whatever it is. That's a big deal. That's a lot of people affected.
it is. Yeah. And like I said, I've been in and out of hospital all my life. I was known as a blue baby, lack of oxygen that went to the brain. And when my mom had me, she was hemorrhaging, so she could not hold me for 2 weeks.
Mm,
So I lived off of an Air Force base back in Arizona in 1976. They did not have the technology in California, so we had to move out here after 2 months. The doctors knew, but never told my parents how it happened. So kind of interesting. I think they wanted me to be different from everybody else. So that's how I am like
wow. Well, Michelle, that's that's a lot to deal with.
it is.
That's a
It is.
lot to deal with. Yeah.
So they also told me I should write a book. I'm like, oh no, I haven't thought about that. I leave it up to you to write your book. So I see great things. I see you all over Facebook, and I heard there's a fake account on your Facebook. What's going on with that?
Oh, there are a bunch of them. There people create these fake accounts, and I think that it seems like there are 4, 5, 6 of these things out there, and I think this happens a lot. It wasn't until I really started to when I was writing the book, Michelle, I decided that I needed to expand my social media presence because I realized that I needed to be able to talk to people about the book and reach large numbers of people. And I engaged a very talented social marketing influencer, social media influencer, to help drive my presence on the internet. So when we started this, and look, by comparison to people who have huge followings, I still have a very small following. But from where we started, where I had 2 or 3 thousand people on Facebook. Now we're almost 60,000 on Facebook and 80,000 on TikTok and 75,000 or 70 something thousand on Instagram. And so, yeah, this has been very effective as a way of reaching people and talking about this year and last year and this year, and for the years ahead, a lot of talking about Little House and why it mattered to all of us, and helping to celebrate 50 years. And obviously, the book that I've written, there, Prairie Man, My Little House Life and Beyond, there has been, I've spent a lot of time talking about this book, and it's helped. The book premiered last week and came up on USA Today's top 100 books in the USA in its first week. So I was incredibly gratified by that, and that's as a result, directly as a result of being able to talk to Little House fans on the level that I've been able to do during the last year. So it's really been quite a ride, and it seems to continue. Little House has a devoted fan base here in the United States and around the world, and so creating these social platforms, or creating a presence in these major social platforms, has allowed that communication to take place, and people have been very kind, and watched videos and liked videos and favorited and followed and all of that. So that's sort of the game that is. That's the world we're in now. We are all our own little networks,
Yep.
and we have to get people to say, I'm going to follow you.
Yep. And my question is, will there be a documentary about your life, like on Lifetime or?
About my life. I don't know that. I think that the book right now, I mean, I think it's what's interesting is all the social media becomes a sort of a snippet of
Yep.
a documentary about your life. And everyone is documenting their life in that sense. Now, I don't go out with the camera and follow myself around the grocery store, or as I'm doing working in the garden or whatever, but you certainly could do that.
Yep.
And a lot of people do. And that, if you make that interesting, people will watch it, and they may not watch it for a long time, but they don't have to watch it for a long time to
Yep.
have an impact. If they watch it for a couple of minutes, if they watch it for a minute and a half, that can be enough to make an impression that's helpful. But you have to be doing what you're doing in an interesting way, um, and then talking about the things that you want people to know about.
Yep. That is.
We did a fun thing the other night, Saturday afternoon. We shot a couple of videos in our kitchen at home making cinnamon chicken. Now, those people, if you know Little House, you know cinnamon chicken. And I'd never had it before. I'd never had, other than doing the scene in the show, which was supposedly cinnamon chicken. It wasn't really cinnamon chicken, because it wasn't. It was very bland. You want it to be bland. You never want the actor choking
Yep.
on cayenne pepper when you're shooting. It's just not a good thing. So anyway, I'd never had it before, and I found this recipe online that related directly to the Little House episode, and we made that recipe, and it's on all of my official Dean Butler platforms: Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And it's amazing to me the number of people who have watched me make and eat cinnamon chicken, and it was delicious. And it was a really terrific recipe. I mean, it took, there are a lot of ingredients, but it's not hard to make, and it's very tasty. And I recommend cinnamon chicken to everybody. And there are a lot of recipes out there, but I found one that was directly related to Little House. And the person
Yep.
who
Yep.
wrote the recipe up was talking about Little House. And so I said, well, that's the one I have to use. And it was great.
I think I like that. And it's kind of weird, like you said, you go older, you find all these recipes for Little House on the Prairie. They probably have apple pie. They have probably a cheesecake, maybe a soda or a coffee after Little House on the Prairie. So it's interesting how it grew over time and how people tried different things. That's how I look at it. So, is there gonna be a next?
Well,
Oh,
oh, yeah. Well, you're talking about apple pie. I mean, if
oh,
you've read anybody who has read the Little House on the Prairie books by Laura Ingalls Wilder and has read her second book called is all about Almanzo as a 9-year-old boy growing up in upper state New York. Almanzo had, and there's a wonderful by a woman named Barbara Walker called appropriately The
yeah.
Little House on the Prairie Cookbook. And she talked to me at one point for a documentary I did and talked about the amazing food that Almanzo had as a little boy. His parents were very successful farmers. Almanzo ate, it seemed, as you read the book, it felt like Almanzo ate apple pie at every meal. It's like there was always apple pie on the table. Now, it's an interesting contrast between Farmer Boy and Laura's other books, where there was a decidedly very meager amount of food
Yeah.
around, particularly in Little House on the Prairie. It was very simple food on the on the banks of Plum Creek. The Ingalls did not have a lot to eat. They had enough to eat to survive, but there was really nothing. Maybe a few meals a year. They had an abundant meal, but a lot of simple eating going on, as opposed to Almanzo and his family, where the way Laura wrote it, and I think she wrote it this way to give contrast. Almanzo grew up in this world of abundance where he had everything. They lived in a nice house and he had plenty of clothes that his mother knitted, and she made the fabric and she made his clothes, and there were he was always warm and cozy in the wintertime, and delicious meals. I mean, pictures that Garth Williams drew in Farmer Boy show the table piled high with food at every meal. And I think this was Laura's way of creating a contrast with her own life, which was, as I mentioned, very simple where food was concerned.
Now, did you get to meet the real Laura Ingalls in life? Did you get to?
Well, Laura passed away, I think, in 1957. So I was about 1 year old when Laura passed, and of course Laura was living in Missouri
Yep.
at Rocky Ridge Farm when she passed away, and I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area in 1957. And growing up, Michelle, we never read the Little House books in
Right.
our family. It just was not part of our family reading. I didn't read the books and really fall in love with them until years after the Little House series was done. When I was doing the series, well, I never read the books before that. And when I started the series, I asked Michael Landon, well, would you recommend things for me to read? Would you recommend the Little House books? Whatever it was. And Michael said to me, all you need to read is what I write about Little House, because of course those are the stories that we're doing, is the stories that he's writing. And I think he was right about that. I mean, what the Little House series was not closely connected to the Little House books. There were some major threads that were pulled through, and I'm grateful to say that the character I played was one of those threads. That Laura and Almanzo story relating to the books goes back to the earliest days of Laura's book writing. Now, Laura was not aware of Almanzo when he was a little boy, but Laura told Almanzo's story starting early when he was a little boy. And then, of
Right.
course, starting in Silver Lake was maybe the first time we heard about Almanzo. Little Town on the Prairie. The Long Winter obviously was a very big moment, or big moments, for Almanzo in that book. And then their romance was really came together in these happy golden years. And then a book that was published after Laura's passing was The First 4 Years. Laura never intended it to be published, but it was published by Roger Lee McBride after he inherited the books, all Laura's books and her work from from Laura's daughter, Rose. And then he published The First 4 Years, and that's when the Little House series really began, was in that window of time. So there is commonality between the books and the series, but Michael introduced characters and stories and lots of things that never took place in Laura's books. And there were a lot of fans of Laura's books that were offended that Michael didn't stick strictly to the books. But his story was that there wasn't enough material, there wasn't enough story in her books to sustain 10 years of television shows.
Right.
So, it went the way it went. But I think the books and the series complement each other really well. The tone of the books and the tone of the series are very similar. So they go together. I think that, and Laura obviously passed away 17 years before Little House premiered on television, but I think she would have really liked it.
Yeah. Well, did you get to meet
Because
Rose?
no, and Rose died I think Rose passed in 1969, I think. So this was, I was in junior high school, and I think it was 1969. We could look it up on Wikipedia right now, but it was late 60s, early 70s that she passed. And then shortly after that, after a gentleman named Roger Lee McBride, who was Rose's attorney, and she called him her adopted grandson, he was her sole heir. And she owned all of her own writings, and she was a very successful writer Rose was in her career. And then, of course, she had inherited all of her mother's work as well. And so Roger then inherited all that from Rose. And it was during that time in 1972 or 3 when Roger Lee McBride was introduced to Ed Friendly, who was, in fact, had wanted to make a television series from the books because he read one of the books himself that his daughter had been reading, and decided they would make a wonderful television series. And so Ed Friendly acquired the television and film rights to Little House from Roger Lee McBride in the early 70s. And I'm thinking it was probably 72, 73 that this happened. And then the pilot was made in late 1973, early 1974, and premiered as a pilot in March of 74. And then, as I said earlier, became a series in September of 1974.
So when I got older, I was watching the reruns. And I don't think
Yes.
I ever got to watch the pilot. I don't remember the pilot.
Well, it is the Little House movie. So it's called, I'm sure you've seen it. If you've watched, well, yeah, I don't, but I actually, the streaming material, they're just focusing on the series. It's 1 hour. When it's possible that they break it up into 2 separate hours, but I think if you had the DVDs, or if you watched on Amazon Prime or on Peacock or at iTunes, if you watched it there, you would be able to watch the pilot. And it's the first thing that was done, and it was again in early 1974. And it's a wonderful pilot, and it really covers, it steps in at the very end of Little House in the Big Woods, or what their life in the Big Woods. And most of the pilot is really the story of Little House on the Prairie, that third book. So it was Little House in the Big Woods, Farmer Boy, and then Little House on the Prairie was her third book. And the pilot is mostly all Little House on the Prairie, the book. And Michael consumed, or the Ed Friendly script that Michael shot, consumed nearly all of the Little House on the Prairie book in that 90-minute pilot. And so, the material got gobbled up very quickly because you have to compress things, and of course a television show or a movie has to have a lot of action in it, and action just consume well action is, you learn about baking bread, or making a bladder ball from a pig's stomach, or from a pig. The movie that was
Yep.
wonderful in Laura's book, but Michael didn't want to tell that story in the movie. So much just goes away.
Yep. And then, like I was telling Dean, there was a show called Gidget, and there was a movie called Gidget. I think it was, I can't remember
Oh, okay.
what year Gidget
Well,
came.
there were a lot of, yes. So Gidget began in the late 1950s. It was a series of novels written by a writer named Frederick Poner,
Right?
and it was based on the life of his daughter. And she was, a young girl, a diminutive little girl who wanted to surf.
Yep.
She wanted to hang out at the ocean, at the beach. And these were the stories that she wrote. And these were the Gidget series of books and the Gidget movies, which started with Sandra Dee. And I believe that was in 1959. Sandra Dee and Cliff Robertson were the really the major stars of that first movie. And that led to other movies, other television movies, the Sally Field series, which
Yep.
ran, I think, for 2 seasons,
Yep.
and then other movies, and finally in the late 19 or the mid 1980s, it led to the Gidget I was involved in, which began with a rom-com movie for television called Gidget Summer Reunion,
Yes.
and then became a series which really was, because of its time periods, was much more like a live action cartoon
Yes.
than a rom-com,
Yeah.
that the original, that our pilot or that our end with. Gidget in its time, and this is sort of interesting, has at its during that window of time, Gidget had spawned more than almost any books. So 7 books, 2 television series, 2 feature films, I think 3 or 4 movies of the week for television.
Right.
A lot came off of those books.
Right.
And so there have been 7 Gidgets and 7 Moondoggies. And so I was the 7th of that. My Gidget, Karen Richmond, was the 7th Gidget. There has not been a Gidget since what we did in the 1980s. It would be interesting to see if anyone wants to take
Yeah,
on
'cause
that
you guys had
material
some
again.
tough
I don't know if
competition.
it'll ever happen.
You had, back then, I think
I'm sorry.
you had tough competition. You had Saved by the Bell, Rags to Riches, Just the 10 of Us. You had Growing Pains. I mean, you guys were like neck and neck. What else? There's a lot of TV shows. Oh, Family Ties is another one, but that was later on at night. And I think my laptop just said we're almost out of time again. This always happens when I'm talking about the Gidget because I don't know, they like to cut us off for some reason. So, Dee, where can they find your book and where can they find you if they want to add you?
So if people want to reach out to me on social media, they can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Official Dean Butler, which is all one word, Official Dean Butler. And then the book can be purchased anywhere. Now it's out. The book can be purchased anywhere books are sold. It can also be purchased online through Amazon and through barnesandnoble.com. You can buy it, and there are other places too. You can buy autographed copies of the book at a beautiful store in Southern California called Book Soup, and that can be found at booksoup.com. And then you can search for signed copies of books and search Prairie Man, and it will come up, and people could order it that way. And I'm going to be out at a lot of Little House on the Prairie events through the summer, with this book and making it available for fans to get it. So there'll be lots of opportunities to get it, but it's been quite an adventure writing this, and it's been fun for me. It really has been. It's been a
Well,
great
I
adventure.
hope that next time I can have you and Allison together. That would be like a little house on the prairie reunion. So again, I am coming back from my aliens. I took some time off. Stay tuned for more guests. And like I said, this is the legendary Dean Butler. You can find him on Peacock, YouTube, any streaming live as possible. You can find our show on the YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio. And before I forget, Maxie is a wonderful creator who designed my shirt. And I'm trying to get some more t-shirts to get you guys out there as soon as I can. So the awareness show is back in action. Thank you, Dean Butler. Stay cool, stay safe, and stay hydrated because it's going to be in the three-digit temperatures again. So thank you, Dean Butler. I hope you have an amazing day.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me.
All right. Have a good day.